I had a discussion earlier, a few hours earlier, very early in the morning, about truth. So this Muslim woman I was talking to said absolute and objective truth are different. Absolute truth is God, and objective truth would be the law. But I also know that some people who talk about these matters talk about objective truth as being, in fact, impossible without belief in God. So there is some question mark over the correctness of these terms. But objective truth is basically what is really the case, even if nobody knows, whether, for example, whether the universe was created or whether it was always there. Now, these matters are actually political, because if you believe in the Abrahamic God, then you would have to say that the universe was created and created by the Abrahamic God. But if you want to be atheist, you'll have to say there's no need to believe in God, because there was no need for the universe to be created, because it was always there. So plenty of information that a lot of people assume, such as, I don't know, climate change, evolution, things that were once controversial, like whether the earth was flat, is really based on politics and status. So you can have high status beliefs and low status beliefs. If you're a flat earther, you're a low status person with conspiracy beliefs. If you think race can be your religion, it's also another low status belief. And in a world of atheism and feminism and liberalism, religion is for stupid people, and therefore believing in God would tend to lower your status, unless you negotiate a thin line between what it is allowed to say about religion and God and what isn't. So, although liberalism, in fact, tolerates Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, if we take a fundamentalist view on our religion about the absolute morality of obeying God's laws, then you will also have your status lowered. You have to take a nuanced position about being both liberal and Catholic, or Marxist and Catholic, and they force people whose views are not actually are not fundamentally in accordance with the mainstream, to say, well, you believe what you like, but you have to, in practice, say you submit to the liberal order, and this the Pope and Archbishop of Canterbury have already done. So what is this kind of submission? It is the submission of hypocrisy, really. So as you know, hypocrites lie, and they want to say yes to some people and no to others. Or if you push them into a corner, they're going to say yes and no, because they don't want to say the answer that will get them into trouble. So they're going to say, it's nuance. On the one hand this, on the other hand that. On balance, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. And they say these things in order to get themselves out of trouble. For example, Duvet has this idea of the multiple truth hypothesis, and he was trying to discuss it on Khalid Safir's channel, but Khalid typically wasn't interested. But basically, what Duvet wants is the ability to say yes and no at the same time. And then he will encounter me who says, well, you can't have your cake and eat it, which means that, you literally cannot. Well, if you only have one cake, you can't eat all of it and still have it, physically in existence, because it'd be, in your tummy. So in order to negotiate what our true beliefs are, or our ancestral beliefs that are not considered politically correct by the current orthodoxy, we have to take nuanced positions on so many things, and we have to either feel ourselves to be telling lies or actually believe in a lie itself. So why do people apparently believe in stupid things? Because they want to think of themselves as fundamentally honest and not lying to anyone or themselves. So they have to internalize the lie in order to feel good, because otherwise they feel, oh, I'm such a hypocrite. I was forced to say all these things I didn't believe in, and I feel, well, low status and violated for being forced to say things I don't believe in, just to get a job, or whatever it is that they wanted, that they felt they had to pay lip service to. So I guess in the olden days in Europe and America, you had to say you believed in God, and you also had to be, you also had to be Christian because everybody was Christian. But after the Reformation, Christianity broke up, and then you had to be the right kind of Christian as far as your community was concerned, or your parents were concerned. Because when people took religion seriously, Catholics weren't allowed to marry Protestants, and if they did, they just get as upset as I don't know, white nationalists, who, with their offspring marrying, outside their race, and of course Jews take mixed marriages very seriously indeed, because it means that their children will never be legitimate, and they will, basically lose their Jewish lineage. So all these rules would have an effect on your mind if you believed in it. And of course, many of you listening to this will say, well, I don't believe in this nonsense. But then you'll get somebody saying, I absolutely believe in this nonsense. You're the one who's wrong. And I guess we'll never know until we are dead. And possibly not even then, if there is no God and no afterlife. So obviously these uncertainties make people go crazy. So what are we to do in the meantime? I think a sense of certainty and conviction is necessary for good mental health. And the reason why so many liberals are in need of therapy is because they're always being told to believe in contradictory things that they instinctively sense is not a true reflection of things. So it's like anti-feminists being forced to be a feminist in order to have sexual access to women who are mostly feminists. It's people who don't believe in the Trinity, expected to say they are a paid up member of their Catholic or Anglican or whatever church, in order to gain social acceptance. And all these concerns are to do with status. And clearly status is important. We need to know, well, we need to know who we are and our relative status in relation to the people around us. In the family, it's quite easy. Obviously, it would be in order of seniority. Usually dad is older than mum, and mum would be older than her eldest son or daughter. And obviously, if you have siblings, you have ways of treating your older siblings and your younger siblings. And Confucius was very strict about that. Now, status is obviously political, and you can find that your status could be high yesterday and lower today, depending on how things go in politics. And white people are finding their status increasingly lowered, which is understandably alarming for them. And so they blame the Jews. Because, well, they've always hated the Jews, and they think blaming the Jews is an assertion of their higher status, being the majority. But the more they blame Jews, the more it is implied that Jews have power over them, and the more it raises the status of Jews over themselves. So knowing this, I guess, drives them mad, in that there seems to be no way out of it. And then, because they mistakenly think that the Abrahamic God is a Jewish God, they start to hate the Abrahamic God, and because they also hate Muslims, and also because they hate Christianity for making them worship a Jew, they reject the entire package of the Abrahamic religion, and this leaves them to this low status paganism that they don't really even believe in. So you'll find all these people who call themselves pagans. You ask them, what is the name of your pantheon? What is the name of your god? And they can never answer, because they have no conviction, really, that they worship, I don't know, Vishnu or Krishna or, Odin or Thor. They don't really believe in it. But so what is in fact happening to these people is that they worship their own feelings of hatred and rage and fear. So this is basically the psychological state of the anti-Semite and Islamophobe and the racist. And what could this Gordian knot of neurosis and psychosis? And I'm saying, if you hypothesize that the Abrahamic God might exist, and doesn't in fact favor Jews over Gentiles, because really God existed before Moses. So there are all these previous prophets like Noah, and according to Muslims, there was also a prophet, just because he was human, I guess, and he spoke to God, and therefore acknowledged his existence. So the only way out of this is to think of status as the key to solving these problems. So this is a conundrum, that you have two people, one is given something first and the other is given something last. So which is a better one? It depends on what these things are, and it becomes even more interesting if these things are in fact books of stories and laws. And if we were being rational, we would be choosing the laws that give us, we would be choosing the book of rules that is the least restrictive, and that becomes a no-brainer, really. You know, of course we're going to choose. If we weren't filled with hatred and rage that the Jews that God is Jewish or anything like that, we would choose the book of rules that is the least restrictive, and that must be the Koran, because we already know that the Torah has 36 capital offenses, and also it applies only to Jews. So it's like, if you think of the Torah and the Koran as, okay, if you're a Gentile, you will think, you've got something that was tailor-made for you. You're a Gentile, and it's also less restrictive than the Torah. And the Torah, if you think of it as a suit, then you'll see what I mean. So there's this Jew, and he's not your body shape, shall we say. So if you were to adopt this suit made for this Jew, you're going to have to alter all kinds of things. You're going to have to, maybe lengthen the trousers or shorten the trousers and lengthen the sleeves and, make the waist bigger or smaller or whatever. So you already know it's not made for you. And a lot of the problem with this thing called Judeo-Christianity is because, well, it wasn't made for you, and you have a more suitable book, but you refuse to use it because you hate Muslims. And you also don't understand your own history. So, but when you think of all the peculiarities of Christianity, which is now called Judeo-Christianity, now, why would people even change the names of religions? It's not Christianity anymore, it's Judeo-Christianity. And obviously the reason is to be more inclusive of Jews. So in a way, it's kind of correct to say, well, because the Holy Bible has Jewish scripture and Christian scripture, it would be kind of more accurate to call it Judeo-Christianity, and Jews and Christians are supposed to live together with equal rights. So instead of calling it Christianity, let's call it Judeo-Christianity to be more inclusive of Jews. But then it doesn't reflect how Christianity was called when Christians took their religion seriously and treated Jews badly because they were perceived as having superseded the status of God's chosen people. And then the Muslims came along and basically said, Jews and Christians are both wrong, and Islam is now, the bee's knees at the final revelation. So it is only through conceiving of the Abrahamic God as being the being who revealed two revelations to mankind, whom he had split into Jews and Gentiles. So was there any purpose in doing it twice? I think so, simply because you need to give someone something to make the other person who hasn't got it really want it. Or you can think of it as an appetiser that the Torah is the appetizer and the Koran is the main course. So that would make sense. And if you did think in those terms, then you would have no difficulty arriving at the conclusion that the Quran is the one humanity should follow, that even Jews would have to agree with, because they should have concluded anyway that they're the scapegoat whenever Gentiles complain about their government. So however badly Jews do, they will be blamed. Even if they get themselves, even if they become the victims of Nazis, Gentiles who hate them will think, well, they have to be destroyed, and look at the sympathy they've got just by being the victims of the Nazis. Look at the homeland they got at the expense of other Gentiles, and why are we paying to protect Israel from the consequences of its own actions? And so even when Jews are doing well, they are hated, and when they're doing badly, I guess they would be despised. But if you understand the overall picture as God saying that there are two revelations, they're both from me, why don't you choose the one that is most suitable for you, which would still entitle you to get to heaven? I mean, I really don't think Jews would even say no to that. And recently I was showing somebody who calls himself a no-hide this timestamp of a talk by Rabbi Mizrahi, who again repeated that Jewish parents have a better chance of bringing up believing Jewish children in Iran than in Israel. So even without realizing it, Rabbi Mizrahi is saying Sharia is better than the liberal democracy of Israel. So if you believe in objective morality or absolute morality, in that it is absolutely correct to not kill, to not steal, to not commit sexual immorality, to not eat the flesh of a living animal, to establish a court and legal system, then you're already 5/7 of the way there. And then the last two, which will be difficult for idolaters and atheists, would be the prohibition against idolatry and blasphemy. And I suppose, in a way, that's actually the most difficult bit of all, because Christians don't seem to be able to recognize that they are guilty of idolatry, no matter how many times I tell them. But I think they can, at least recognize that Jews and Muslims think Christians are idolaters, because there are all these Jews and all these Muslims who think their religion is better and won't become Christians. So why do Christians care? Either they don't understand that it's idolatry, or they don't accept that it's idolatry, or they don't care that it's idolatry. So let's be charitable and let them think that Christianity is not idolatry because Jesus is God. But it's still idolatry, even if they've got it wrong. Even if they sincerely believed that Jesus is God, they've got it wrong, haven't they? Because Jesus is not God. Jews and Muslims would back me up. Or they just can't understand idolatry. So it's meaningless. And within Christianity, no Christian can accept that Christianity is idolatry while remain and still remain a Christian. So they are in an awkward position. So those who stay in Christianity, even though they know it's idolatry, do it only because they don't believe God exists to punish them for anything. And this would be the cultural Christian who is, in fact, atheist. So what does this have to do with objective morality? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that if you're going to be objective about idolatry, then it means that you have to define idolatry properly. And if you see idols of Mary and Jesus in churches, then it's idolatry, isn't it? Well, we know that there've been all kinds of excuses like, well, yeah, they are idols, but it only helps focus our minds, and we don't think Jesus actually inhabits the statue, or Mary inhabits the statue of Mary. It's just a way, it's a representation, and nonsense like that. But Jews and Muslims would say, well, we can't worship anything that isn't divine, because that's idolatry. So if Jesus died and Mary died, then they're not divine. And worshipping mortal people is by definition idolatry. So really the point is that these Christians don't care. And they don't care because they don't want to admit that they've been wrong for centuries. So they are guilty of the sin of pride, which Christians call a deadly sin. But if you think of God, the one who created the universe, and you think of how many light years it is, and how many miles a light year is, then you couldn't possibly really think that a man created the universe. And also, there is no need to believe that God is a man, because why would God tell you not to commit idolatry and then tell you to worship a man? Why would he do such a thing? Is he like some kind of dithering woman who can't make up his mind? Or he was only kidding about the 10 Commandments? I mean, can't people think these questions through? And if they're indifferent, then obviously they're atheists, and we can ignore them. But as atheists, they need to be asked what kind of society they would like to live in. Would they want a law-abiding society where people would fear to break the law? Or the kind of society they currently live in, full of crime and immigrants? So I think these questions have driven them mad, and even trying not to think about these things drives them mad, because these are actually quite urgent questions, because answering the question correctly would actually help them solve their problems once they adopt Sharia, which is objective morality and eternal and universal laws.